And Qantas has farewelled its last remaining Boeing 747 from its fleet. The flying kangaroo took delivery of its first jumbo jet in 1971 and eventually became the world's only all 747 airline. The retirement of the aircraft, known as the Queen of the Skies, has been brought forward by 6 months due to the pandemic. It's headed for an aircraft graveyard in the Mojave Desert in the United States to be used for spare parts. Well, let's get more on the departure of the final Qantas 747 flight and to discuss what air travel will look like after the pandemic. And we're joined by aviation consultant Andrew Charlton from Geneva. Andrew, good to talk to you. So the 747, no doubt, has been an international workhorse for Qantas. So why has it retired the iconic jet?
It's more than just an international workhorse for Qantas. It was one of the great aeroplanes, one of the truly great aeroplanes of the world. It, as your report said, first launched in '71. I remember, as a matter of fact, when I worked for Qantas, standing in the old Qantas building in the middle of the city, watching the record-breaking 747 that flew non-stop from London to Sydney coming in. It's being retired because it's not a young aeroplane, it's not a new aeroplane, but most importantly of all, it has 4 engines to fly flights that aircraft now with only 2 engines can fly in terms of range. So it's very heavy on fuel burn, very bad for emissions, of course, but also just for the purchase of the fuel that's necessary. It's also an aircraft which, frankly, for the future, now that we're talking about what aviation is going to look like, that is too big. Unfortunately, for the next foreseeable future, there aren't going to be enough passengers to fill that aeroplane up. It was epoch-making in its day. It created cheap fares. It created a whole raft of the way that we fly now, or the way that we used to fly until now. But unfortunately, it's run its course.
Well, gee, if that's too big, what then do you make of the A380, the Airbus? Given that is a lot larger, what will take the 747's place?
Well, what will take the 747's place is a lot more flights by many smaller aeroplanes, the 787 and the A350 in particular. The A380, almost every airline on earth that has even owned A380s has pushed them up against the fence. The only airline that is using them, I believe, is Emirates. And they are, of course, they've got about 100 A380s. And that's a really interesting decision. I can only think the reason why they're doing that is to literally give tickets away, or effectively give tickets away, to try to re-bolster some confidence in the aviation industry and in travelling, which is very generous of them for the rest of the industry, but frankly, very difficult to justify economically.
Yeah, so Andrew, it's not just airlines, of course, that are suffering during this pandemic. Aircraft manufacturers are also doing it tough. In particular, Boeing. Now, it's still got those ongoing problems with the 737 MAX. How long before that gets back in the air?
How long is a piece of string, precisely, Andrew? At the moment, the MAX is at a point where the word is that they've done a series of test flights, and they've done a series of test flights involving the regulator, the FAA itself. And the FAA is now proposing to put out a notice of possible decision-making, which then goes to public consultation for 90 days. So realistically, in the United States, we can probably see the MAX in the sky by about Christmas, I would imagine. But for the rest of the world, there's airframe manufacture and airframe operation is as much political as technical. For the rest of the world, remember when the MAX was grounded, each of the other countries, and most importantly EASA, the European Aviation Safety Agency on behalf of all the European countries, made their own decisions and decided that they were going to satisfy themselves as to whether it was safe or not. And when they did that, of course, they built into that process the requirement that they also do the same in reverse. So even after the FAA has approved this aircraft for flying again, the Europeans, the Chinese, and indeed the Australians and others will need to, if only to save face, frankly, will need to be seen to be doing something else to check that it's okay to fly again. So I think the best we can hope for the MAX is early next year.
OK, you talk about ready to fly again. What's going to happen as far as the airlines, when the pandemic is over, they're going to look to recover costs, are they not? So will that mean inevitably that we're going to be paying more to travel on aeroplanes?
Unfortunately, well, yes, is the answer to that question, I think almost inevitably. But there's a more important underlying issue there, I think, which is that when the pandemic's over, we're going to need to restore confidence in flying, and that's a very big ask. And most surveys and most people now think that they'll be flying, give or take, 2023 sort of time frame, as it takes a while to rebuild that. I also think that a lot of the things that we used to do aren't going to happen anymore. I think business travel, for example, is going to change its methods of working enormously. Or sorry, I should have said business is changing its methods, and that's to do with Zoom and the fact that you and I are talking by Skype and all those things. What I think is going to happen is business people will continue to travel, but they will make fewer but longer trips. I think the days of dashing down to Melbourne for a 1 hour meeting are over. If you're going to fly to Melbourne, you'll make sure that you've jammed in as many meetings as possible, and you'll stay there for 3 or 4 days and then fly back. That sort of thing is going to happen. And if flying to London from Sydney or from Melbourne, obviously you'll put in weeks worth of meetings and weeks worth of travel. So there'll continue to be business travel, but it will be much more, I think, in the way that the millennials, apparently I can't speak as one, the millennials travel, which is, it's all about the experience, and it's longer trips, more experiential trips rather than very quick sort of overnight long weekends, those sorts of things. I think a lot of that travel is going to change. What that inevitably means is that there will be fewer passengers and there will be fewer flights. And at the moment we have an industry which is structured on a cost base that assumes unlimited amounts of flying and unlimited amounts of passengers. So there needs to be a massive reorganisation, recalibration of the entire industry. And that will include, yes, frankly, probably more expensive tickets in the medium to long term. And it will also mean that flying becomes more of an experience again. Now, whether we get back to the point where gentlemen will be expected to wear ties and ladies expected to wear gloves and hats is another matter. But glory days. Yeah. And all of a sudden, perhaps overnight trains will come back. Maybe even if the blimp technology keeps working, 2 days to fly from London to New York, for example, on a low blimp could be quite pleasant, could be quite a very glorious way to travel again. So I think all of those changes are going to happen. In the short term, as if to make a liar of me, what's going to happen now is as flying starts to come back, airlines, as I say, and Emirates, case in point, absolutely desperate to get people back on board. Emirates and others, every airline, is going to do what airlines always do when they want to encourage people to travel. They will have a rash of a complete outbreak of discounting, and there will be cheap tickets on the market. But certainly here in the northern summer, once the summer's over and we get back to winter, and people traditionally don't travel as much in the winter, of course, the traffic will turn down.
Yep.
All of those vouchers that people have been offering will have been honoured, so airlines will run out of money again.
Still a long way off, though, I would have thought, Andrew. Yep.
What's that, sorry?
Still a long way off, I would have thought, as far as the pandemic is concerned. Sorry, we are out of time, but I really do appreciate you talking to us. Andrew Charlton, thanks very much.
A pleasure.